good morning. I am Joanne Murray. I am the director of the Albright Institute for Global Affairs, and I welcome you to day one. The Albright Institute is recognizing Wellesley's extraordinary presence for leadership in the world and honoring the country's first woman Secretary of State, Madeleine Korbel Albright. This institute is built on the legacy of service that Wellesley has had since its founding. And it is just this, working, being of service to the world and in the world, that underscores the educational mission of this institute. Wellesley's legacy of leadership is pervasive. This mandate of service is inseparable from the Albright Institute and the college. I want to talk first about who you are, because you're a big part of the success of the Institute and of why we've structured the Institute the way we have. There are 21 juniors and 19 seniors. Originally, this Institute was going to be only for juniors, but the first year we made an exception so that the seniors could get grandmothered in, and because the seniors contributed so very much, we were convinced to go ahead and allow seniors to participate in the Institute. You represent, of the 40 of you, 27 different majors, from Africana Studies to Women's Studies. 29 of you are U.S. citizens, although 10 have dual citizenship, and 11 are international students. You represent 13 countries: Canada, China, Ethiopia, France, Germany, Georgia, India, the Philippines, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and the United Kingdom, in addition to the United States. You will certainly learn as much from each other as you learn from the best faculty or most expert presenter. And we've designed this institute to be a living, learning laboratory. You were very deliberately chosen. And as I've already stated in earlier orientation meetings, we have very high expectations of you. All of you will be expected to extend Wellesley's legacy of leadership and service, to give back here at home and to give back to the larger, increasingly interdependent global community. Much of this institute is based on the thoughts and work and theory of John Dewey, American psychologist, philosopher, and educator, whose ideas have been influential, both to educational reform and social reform. Dewey claimed that interest in learning from all contexts in life is the essential moral interest. At the conclusion of his seminal work, Democracy and Education, Dewey made this simple but radical claim: openness to the world is the foundation of all education. We begin with this basic foundation here today as well. Through academic expertise, leading practitioner perspectives, and cross-disciplinary pedagogies and approaches, we invite you into this month-long dialogue of questions. Albright Institute faculty are among our most accomplished philosophers, theologians, scientists, and political scientists. Representing the disciplines that define the liberal arts, Albright Institute distinguished faculty include professors like Joseph Joyce, who will be here later this morning to lecture to you and is my faculty co-director, Stacy Goddard, Dan Chasen, Alden Griffin, just to name a few. They will engage you in the discovery and analysis of global issues from their areas of research expertise. Further, they will encourage the kind of cross-disciplinary thinking that is required in order to solve the complexities of the world's beauties as well as problems. In the Albright Institute, we will be interacting with some of the towering architects of our time, those who currently shape the major issues we face. Former Wellesley president Nan Cohen and first female president of Duke University, paving the way for other women to lead large research universities. Ophelia Dahl, pioneer in public health. Nick Burns, former Undersecretary of State for many years and specialist on the Middle East, to name only a few. And of course, this year's visiting distinguished professors, Carol Browner, the first director of the Environmental Protection Agency, and our own Secretary Albright. A global business executive who focuses on how business can be part of the solution, not the problem. An expert in art conflict zones. The chaplain of the Marine Corps of the United States. A former researcher of the Wellesley Centers for Women, and now the head of Hillary's Women in Public Service initiative at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and even a spy who was undercover in the CIA for 24 years. These are but a few of the women and men who will provide expert insider perspectives on today's most vexing global issues. Now, those that have known me for a while have heard me reference a person who has been important in my own life. And this is a woman named Billie Avery, who is the head of the National Black Women's Health Movement. And Billie Avery spoke at the inauguration of one of our presidents, and she said, "Take every lesson that you can from a woman's life. Take every lesson that you can from a woman's life." This is one of the incredible gifts and opportunities of this institute. Because the women and men who will come here to speak with you are not just sharing research expertise. They are willing to open their lives to you and talk to you about the critical decision points for them. The key times in their lives when they were floundering, or they had competing issues, or they had uncertainty in some way. And they can inspire you with their honesty and their openness and their lessons. And I encourage you to take advantage of that. If you've never come up front after a speaker, come up front. Make sure you've signed up for the teas and the coffees and the lunches. Make sure you push yourself out of your comfort zone, because these individuals understand that in coming here, yes, they are sharing their expertise, but they're also sharing their stories, which is a key part of your own leadership story. In President Bottomley's first commencement address, she called upon the Wellesley College community to be a more intellectually vibrant place. To quote her, "We need coordinating thinking, thinking that crosses the boundaries of disciplinary specialization and ideological focus. We must have specialists today, of course, but more than ever, we need broadly informed thinking. We need people who can rise to the challenge of providing synthesis, who can bring together, as appropriate, the sciences, the humanities, the social sciences, and all this knowledge into wisdom. We need conversation now more than ever, and conversation of the type that occurs only in a true intellectual community." Bottomley pointed to Charles Darwin, the naturalist and geologist who developed his theory of evolution based on correspondence he maintained and the inspiration he garnered from discussion with Thomas Robert Malthus, a political economist and demographer. This is a perfect illustration of the power of broad intellectual dialogue. Their exchanges became the intellectual stepping stones for Darwin's world-altering theory. Who will be your Robert Malthus in this institute? Who will be your unlikely partner in helping unlock the problems that you seek to solve? Through the Albright Institute, we will employ the teaching and wisdom of John Dewey to examine the relationship between theory and action. Dewey admonished teachers to create open-ended learning experiences for their students rather than relying solely on formal lectures replete with abstract information. Dewey claimed that experience was the impetus for the creation of knowledge and the transformation of the knower. So you will learn hands-on from your collective group work and then from your hands-on internships the power of experience in creating new insight, knowledge, and hopefully wisdom. So this institute is about a new kind of learning for a new world, learning from and engaging with authorities, your faculty here, those you seek out across the globe in the weeks ahead. But it is more. It is as importantly about learning from each other, because you have, as you have already heard in my demographic review, you are a wealth of global perspective and experience in the world already. You will live and learn together. You'll cook with each other. You'll share common space. You'll listen to each other's stories. And I ask you to please share your stories with each other. And yet the Albright Institute is still more. The mantle of responsibility for the success of the Institute comes not from you as a receiver, but from you as a co-creator. We take this very seriously. You will be a lifelong shaper of Secretary Madeleine Albright's legacy through your manifestation of your life. This is daunting, but this is what the Institute demands. Let me say that again. You will be a lifelong shaper of Secretary Madeleine Albright's legacy through your manifestation of your life. When Provost Shannon and I traveled to Washington to meet with Secretary Albright, when this was just an idea in 2008, and we sat in her office, she said, "I don't want bricks and mortar. I'm happy James Baker has a library. I think we have a perfectly good library at Wellesley College. I want leaders. I want people, women, who are going to go out and transform the world. I want the image of them fanning across the globe, the image of them sitting across the table from each other some years later, representing different countries, knowing how to solve problems in new ways, knowing how to learn and put that learning into action in new ways." And that is what we promised to give her, and that is what she is helping us shape. She's very involved in the Institute. It is not just her name, as you will come to know firsthand. So this Institute is about collective action over individual achievement, learning that what we can figure out together and design together across disciplinary boundaries, personal strengths, and histories holds the key to real understanding and therefore real problem solving. I'm going to share more about Secretary Albright's views of this in a little bit. But first I want to talk about the focus on learning that means a self-discipline of mind and action. It's about an ethic of accountability and responsibility. Here again, we have high expectations of you, some of which are countercultural at Wellesley. So the first, very countercultural, we want you to be on time. We are actually going to start on time. We may be the only Wellesley program that starts on time, but we're going to start on time. So we expect you to be here in advance so that we can start on time. We expect you to be prepared to do these readings. We've been very clear with the presenters that we do not want them to give us readings. We want this to be manageable for you because we very, very much want for you to be prepared in the classroom. We want you to push yourself out of your comfort zone. So if you have always been the quiet student, we want you to put your hand up. Now be warned, Professor Joyce cold calls anyway, so it doesn't matter. And because we're getting old, we made your name tags much bigger, thank you, Beth, so that we can actually see your names when we cold call on you. But if you are also the student who has always asked more questions than anybody else, I ask you to sit on your hands and listen and learn that listening can be as active a way of learning as participating. Really want you to set some personal goals for yourself. Be bold. Think about who you talk to when you most want to change something in your life. Talk to that person and say, how am I going to do this differently? What am I going to gain? What am I going to contribute? And think a lot about if you believe something should be different, make it different. Don't tell us, and certainly don't complain. Come in with a great idea and say, I think we should have a new group that does this or that, or I think we should incorporate this new element into the program. Come with a suggestion. You'll be amazed at how much Professor Joyce and I will welcome that. And much of the strengths of the Institute in recent years have come from students with great ideas. And this point is a point that you will probably hear me hammering away at more than you want to, which is to focus on critical inquiry more than critical judgment. Wellesley students are very well trained at giving feedback and being critical through a critical reasoning lens. I want to encourage you to cultivate something that I believe will serve you much better in whatever your line of work is and in whatever your life is, and that is critical inquiry. To wonder why before you wonder what's wrong. And I really encourage that of you, and we'll probably talk to you about that, as I said, more than you want to hear it. I want to also encourage you to focus on the questions and not the answers. As Professor Steve Marini, ethicist and theology professor here says, you're going to spend the rest of your life answering the questions. Let's talk about how to ask the right questions in this institute. That's the purpose, is to try to understand what are the right questions to ask rather than what are the wrong ones. So, two more things. One, in addition to setting personal goals, I really want you to take some risks. I want you to try things you haven't tried because you're not being graded here. You can take some risks because that's not what's on the line. You can focus on learning for learning's sake. And I'm hoping, and I invite you to be humbled by what you hear. If you aren't, we have failed. I send students through the Center for Work and Service, over 300 students a summer all over the world. And the one thing I most want to hear when they come back onto campus in the fall is, wow, I understand things, or I don't understand things that I thought that I did. And that the experiences serve to make them more humbled people rather than more entitled people. So I challenge you to be humbled by what you hear rather than more entitled. Consider this advice from Secretary Albright. She said, by definition, learning means exploring areas of life and opinions with which you are not already familiar. Instead of choosing to read or listen to only the people whose views make you the most comfortable, choose instead to study those who make you the most upset. Instead of surrounding yourself with friends whose experiences are similar to yours, reach out to classmates whose stories are unknown. Instead of repeating over and over again the opinions you've expressed in the past, stop venting for a month. Ask yourself why you believe as you do, and submit your own conceptions of the truth to the rigorous standards of critical thinking. Above all, I ask you to understand that there's an enormous difference between entering into an argument for the purpose of winning and engaging in research and discussion for the purpose of stretching your mind and giving free rein to your conscience. So this institute requires a personal commitment to a life of courage and consequence. Why? Because we will address the chronic conditions that weaken societies: lack of water, food, disease, sanitation, poverty, war and violence, no or little work opportunity. And this year especially, we will do that through the lens of gender. As you will hear from Nan Cohen and Rangita de Silva Alves about why women's leadership is in many ways the cause of our time, we will look at women upon whose shoulders poverty most rests and why they are the critical agents for change as well. The Albright Institute will also reference and interpret movements and crises and contemporary challenges as they are unfolding. The crises of advanced economies and the challenges of developing economies. We will look at protracted problems in the U.S., the increasing gap between rich and poor, intractable government problems that resulted in a shutdown in 2013. Today, as we meet, Janet Yellen, the first female head of the Federal Reserve, is being considered by the U.S. Senate. She is not a Wellesley woman, darn it, but as she seeks to restore and rebuild a solid foundation for the United States and contribute to a stronger global economy. We will look at the continuing rise of China as a global economic power, along with the increased tensions in the South and East China Seas between Asian countries. We'll talk about our pivot to Asia, and we'll talk about some of our own internal turmoil at Wellesley as we've been determining the rules of engagement and terms of engagement in our own global partnerships and relationships we're establishing. And we'll talk about the struggle of landlocked, resource-poor countries with little infrastructure and the problems and persistent issues that those countries experience. We'll talk about the unfolding turmoil in the Middle East, about Syria as it navigates its chemical weapons agreement and prepares for peace talks in Geneva on the 20th when we will still be meeting. And there will be a great opportunity to talk about that with Secretary Albright when she's here. I'm sure she'll have a lot to say about that. We'll talk about the changing landscape in Iran and how to make sense of this new thawing relationship. Is it thawing? Is it real? And we'll talk about the juxtaposition of an interplay of natural and man-made disasters. Most recently, the catastrophe of Super Typhoon Haiyan, which left 2 million people homeless and yielded at least 5,000 deaths. We'll talk a little bit about how these catastrophes become indicators of the geopolitical climate with how resources are allocated. And we will visit the still recovering areas from Hurricane Sandy, from Japan and its 9.0 earthquake and resultant nuclear disaster, and from floods in Pakistan, just to name a very few. Climate change and the politics of climate change are going to be a central focus this year for the Albright Institute as Secretary Albright and Carol Browner debate the topic in the final week's dialogue open to the entire community. And importantly, this year, we will examine all of these global issues through the lens of infrastructure as you work in your groups to focus on transportation, energy, communication, health, water, culture, and climate change. What we learned in the reading that Kitty DiMartino assigned in The New Yorker, that she'll talk about tomorrow, is that infrastructure is much more than science and engineering, public policy, and resource allocation. It is heavily dependent on social connection and policies and practices that benefit all before a crisis. The health of a community before a crisis is a strong indicator of how a community will survive. That the best techniques of safeguarding cities don't just mitigate disaster, they also strengthen the networks that promote health and prosperity during ordinary times. So when we think about infrastructure, we are not thinking about bricks and mortar or resource allocation, we are thinking about a truly cross-disciplinary approach to how we live in our dailiness and how we will survive through disaster. In the weeks ahead, we will discuss lives of consequence. I only have one slide. But these are some of the people who we will turn to and who will inspire us. Already, even at the age of 16, the inspiration of Malala Yousafzai, now known only by a single name, who has through her powerful example, been a wellspring of global support for the advancement of girls' access to education. Addressing the United States on her 16th birthday, Malala presented to Ban Ki-moon a petition asking world leaders to pour funds into building new schools, training new teachers, and ending the scourges of child marriage, underage labor, and trafficking. We will talk about the lives of courage, resilience, and endurance. Lives like Nelson Mandela, whose lifelong commitment to justice gave us an inspiring and enduring icon of the struggle against racial oppression. His spirit and principle of reconciliation is one that we will consider closely in this winter session, as he left for us a path of how to move forward. We'll turn to the lives of Aung San Suu Kyi, Burmese opposition leader, whose lifelong unflagging efforts to show support for Myanmar and the many people throughout the world who are striving to attain democracy, human rights, and ethnic conciliation by peaceful means. As Burma slowly considers revising its constitution, we will watch carefully to see if she will be able to and if she will choose to run for president in 2016. And we will also focus on lives of sacrifice. The death from a gang rape of the 23-year-old medical physiotherapy student on a public bus in New Delhi that resulted in the 2013 highly visible public trial and sentencing of the perpetrators. And as importantly, her death that prompted acts of courage to stand up for, perhaps the first time, women and men to come forward and decry this atrocity. People always ask me what makes a Wellesley education one that sticks. Lots of Wellesley partners ask me what makes Wellesley education one that sticks. One that scratches under the surface, one that for right and wrong persists for a lifetime. It is so much more than the presence of role models, though they are aplenty. It is so much more than learning from great text, historic and those newly emerging, likely to someday bear that label. And it is so much more than being asked to analyze, deconstruct, reconstruct. And yes, it is even more than learning to connect insight into action for lifelong work and service to others for the greater good of the world. What then is the crucible for global leadership? What then is Wellesley's Albright Institute about? In designing the Institute, Wellesley seeks to open a path of possibilities to use your education to contribute to the field that calls you, about which you care most deeply, most passionately. What do you care enough about that you will bring your considerable knowledge, ambition, and resources to focus? It may very well be that when you identify that, leadership will happen. So today, my charge to you, the 5th Institute class of fellows, is to consider how you will extend Wellesley's reach in the world as a poet or scientist, policy analyst or care provider. Your presence as vibrant, informed, insightful members of our intellectual community will help shape this institute. Through inquiry and action, we seek to understand and formulate ideas to address the most vexing issues of our time. I want to thank in particular the individuals who've been critical in advancing this institute. The first is my professional partner, our faculty director of the institute, economics professor Joseph Joyce, whose book, The IMF and the Global Financial Crises, Phoenix Rising, was published by Cambridge University Press just a year ago, I believe. And you will hear from him an overview of our infrastructure issues in just a few minutes. But I want to go back and remember to thank President Kim Bottomley, because when Kim started her job here, it was a different world and a different Wellesley. And then the global economic crisis happened. Our endowment plummeted 25 to 30%. And Kim had the courage and the foresight to continue forward with the Albright Institute, knowing that this kind of learning is the future of liberal education, and that to not adhere to that, even in the face of that adversity, would not advance Wellesley in strong ways. However, it still constituted a very bold decision. I want to thank the folks at the top of the room, Kate Miller, who you already know, but you will no doubt come to appreciate even more fully and respect completely, and Beth Robichaux, who is the logistics and planning queen for everything, and they are the reason that the Institute runs the way that it does, and I especially want to thank them. When we enter this community, we enter a covenant of service to live lives of noblest usefulness, as was told to the first class of Wellesley students by Wellesley's founder, Henry Fowle Durant. But it is more than with privilege comes responsibility, or to whom much is given, much is expected. It is that privilege without responsibility has potential for peril. A Wellesley education can be used to distance and insulate yourself from the problems of the world, or lead you to become a force to address them. It can serve to separate you from poverty, or catalyze you to uproot its causes, protect you from violence, or mobilize you to work towards its end. Study and analysis disconnected from action can run the risk of being polemic and irrelevant. But action without analysis can be misguided and ineffective in addressing the causes of the problems that plague our planet. In short, your education can be used to yield tools for your own advancement or opportunities to educate, advocate, and organize for the greater good. Secretary Albright's Institute is based on fostering and building global leaders, to helping you discover and advance the passion that will drive you. How can your life's study, research, and action help shape a better, more just world? That is what a crucible for new learning for a new world is, and that is the Albright Institute. Thank you.